Hello and welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras, and coming up in today's newscast, Israel officially sets off on its campaign to vaccinate the nation. But meanwhile, new virus restrictions imposed on travel as a new, more infectious strain of the virus is discovered. And finally, breaking borders with a new song of peace, artists from across the region join together for an incredible ensemble. The time has finally arrived. Israel's drive to inoculate the public against the coronavirus pandemic, kicking off Saturday night from the Sheba Medical Center in Jerusalem.
אז זה נאמר, זריקה קטנה לאדם וצעד ענק לבריאות של כולנו. יהיה בהצלחה, תלכו להתחסן.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Health Minister Yuli Edelstein sticking true to their words and becoming the first Israelis of the general public to get the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine against coronavirus Saturday evening. And this followed now by President Rivlin and many others eagerly arriving at their HMOs to receive the first of their 2 shots. Partying politicians explaining that they want to serve as inspiration for the rest of the country.
No, I wasn't nervous, and I thought it was important to set a personal example so all Israelis would go and vaccinate themselves, because I think that if we do this together, we'll beat the corona, and sooner than people expect. Thank you.
It will improve my life, because now, after 3 weeks from now, we will get the boost, and then we can go and travel. We will not be afraid of anything. We can go with the people, with my wife, with my father, with my mother, with everyone.
Well, it looks like the campaign has already started to work. Israeli HMO websites literally crashing, requiring maintenance over the weekend due to the traffic of requests for vaccine appointments. And so far, only health workers and at-risk groups, including people over age 60, are eligible for the shot in the first place. As for the rest of the nation, no hard date for vaccinating the general public has yet been set, but authorities hope to begin by the end of the month. Meanwhile, as we're inching closer and closer to herd immunity, the Israeli Intelligence Ministry has decided to end its controversial surveillance of Israelis for the sake of contact tracing. Permissions for the method are set to expire January 20, 2021, and the ministry will not ask for renewal. But despite all of the good news, the pandemic is still spreading fast. Coronavirus cabinet ministers set to discuss whether or not to reimpose general closures on trade again. This as the average number of daily infections is expected to reach the government-imposed red line of 2,500. The overnight number of active cases rising now to 24,356, with a positivity rate of 3.1%, at least 466 in serious condition, and the death toll jumping up to 3,082. Now in other coronavirus news, yet another round of new travel restrictions is setting in response to a newly discovered and dangerous mutation of the virus. Pandemic aside, anyone planning to come to Israel in the immediate future may have another thing coming. Israel's coronavirus cabinet now weighing new restrictions on international arrivals due to the detection of a new, more infectious mutation of the novel coronavirus disease. And so far, the cabinet has decided to force all arrivals from all countries abroad to self-isolate upon landing in Israel, starting Wednesday, with exceptions only for those returning by December 26th and who are visiting countries that were classified as green up until the new closures were announced last week. Then taking things one step further, senior Israeli government officials will be enforcing a full quarantine on all those arriving from Australia, South Africa, New Zealand, Denmark, and the UK, where the new strain of the virus is thought to be spreading. No exceptions. As for non-Israelis hoping to come for a visit, you're of course probably out of luck too. Israeli airlines have already been ordered to refuse boarding to non-citizens, and in fact, whole airports may soon be next to close their doors.
אנחנו קודם כל צריכים להגן על הגבולות של מדינת ישראל, מתנצלים בפני כל אלה שעלולים להיפגע מכך, אבל הכי חשוב להיות בטוחים שאנחנו עם הצרות שלנו, עם הנגיף המוכר והגדול, ולא מכניסים לארץ מוטציות נוספות.
ולכן להערכתך השבוע השמיים ייסגרו, כלומר נתב"ג ייסגר השבוע?
אני מאוד מקווה שכן, כי כאן הזמן הוא קריטי. מה שאנחנו לא נעשה מיד, מה שלא נעשה בשעות הקרובות, כבר יהיה חבל לעשות.
Joining me now with more on the Israeli COVID vaccinations drive is Professor Manfred Green, Director for the Masters in Public Health program at the University of Haifa. Professor Green, thank you so much for being with us. Now,
Thank you.
How will vaccinations affect the need for a shutdown? You know, will there even be a need for another shutdown if enough people get vaccinated between now and then?
Well, I think you've heard this before, but I'll repeat it, that we're at the beginning of the vaccination campaign, and most of the population are still non-vaccinated. They don't have antibodies, so they're not protected. So the virus can spread very easily. So we're really right at the beginning. You have to remember that we need to vaccinate anything upwards of 70 or more % in order to reach a stage where we reduce the transmission in the country and we get to a stage where we won't be having so many cases as we are right now. In any event, people will have to maintain the same kind of social distancing, wearing masks, and avoiding gatherings.
So really, I mean, assuming that we can get most of the public vaccinated by even the end of January, if we're being generous according to the schedule put forth by the government, you know, so you're saying even months beyond that, we're probably going to have to continue with certain measure of hygiene restrictions. Am I understanding that correctly?
Sure. You know, first of all, we're going to be doing something in this country which other countries are also doing, but they're going to be doing it at a slower pace probably. Some of them may be at the same pace, but we seem to be one of the countries that are doing it much faster. So we're still going to be in a world where that virus is going to be everywhere. So there are two problems. One is that there are still going to be people who have not been vaccinated. And remember that even people who have been vaccinated, this does not give 100% protection. So you've got to remember there's still a 5% or whatever of the population who are not protected. And we still have to evaluate that over time. So it's a very good start, but we need a lot of caution. We need to maintain we certainly need to maintain masks, and we need to maintain the regular social distancing. Okay. There are other things that we may then be able to relax at a later stage. Certainly we will, but you know, certainly it's gradual.
So what do you now make, moving on a little bit, about the new rumors surrounding the new mutation of the coronavirus, the one basically shutting down travel from the UK and Australia and a number of other countries?
Okay, this is a virus. It's what's called an RNA virus, the genetic form. And these viruses do mutate. They replicate and they make mistakes and they mutate. So the virus generally does mutate anyway. And we've seen the mutations up to now. However, this is a significantly larger mutation, making it somewhat different from the current circulating virus. It doesn't mean, though, that that virus is going to cause more severe disease. And it doesn't mean that, in fact, it won't respond to the vaccine. They're very much related viruses. But it does mean that we have to be very careful. The longer the virus circulates in the world, generally, the more mutations there'll be. So that's why it's always good to try and get it under control. The optimists may say that the mutation might turn it into a less virulent. In other words, it may cause less severe disease. But we don't know. It could go either way.
Right. All right, well, kind of going deeper into something that you just said about this new mutation and the vaccine that is coming out, the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, you know, how mutated does the coronavirus need to get before the vaccine is really inefficient? I mean, are we talking essentially about a new virus completely, or is that possible that the virus evolves or mutates quickly enough that this vaccine will be useless by the time enough people get it?
Well, you know, we have to follow this very carefully, and we're still learning about that. But if you take the parallel with the influenza virus, which is a different family and a different virus, but the influenza virus is also an RNA virus, and it also mutates, but it mutates somewhat much more than the coronavirus, or at least in the time that we've seen it around. Mm-hmm. So what happens with the influenza virus is, as you know, that regularly each season we reevaluate the influenza virus and actually formulate a new vaccine. It doesn't mean that the previous vaccines are no good at all, but it means they're less effective. So there is the possibility always that at some stage there may have to be a reformulation of the coronavirus vaccine. At the moment, it doesn't seem that mutation right now will require any kind of reformulation. It's probably going to be okay for the vaccine that we're using right now.
All right, Professor Green, thank you so much.
Thanks very much.
In other news, psychologically dealing with the coronavirus and its consequences has been a burden too heavy for some to bear alone. Yet in the midst of this ongoing pandemic, the health ministry in Israel is reportedly set to cut funding for in-house mental health experts across all HMOs statewide. Newly revealed documents suggesting that the cuts will result in a loss of at least 400 psychologists in the public sector alone, while exacerbating a system already plagued by a psychologist shortage and a 6-month-long waiting list for treatment. Psychologist Dr. Camila Forkash-Levan joins me to discuss. Dr. Levan, thank you so much for being with us. Now, how bad of a situation is it that we're discussing here? You know, why does it already, as is, take 6 months to get treatment?
So the problem is actually pretty big. 6 months, that's like in a good case scenario. Often it takes over a year, and in the periphery, even more. It's a big problem. There are a shortage of psychologists that are willing to also work because the pay is not so high. There's also literally shortage of actual professionals also. And again, in the periphery, even more. One good thing that came out with this whole corona situation is that we are more open to being virtual. Often people that weren't open before now are open. That gives more access, especially, again, if you're in the periphery. However, again, we're back to the original problem of the professionals that we're lacking, and we're lacking on a very big scale.
Well, now, so the government is talking about these budget cuts, and the government claims, the health ministry specifically, is claiming that these cuts will not result in layoffs. Do you think that there's a chance of that maybe this is being blown out of proportion and that these psychologists, these 400 some, mental health professionals are not going to be laid off?
I don't see how that's possible unless they're going to redivert somehow the money in such a way that the salaries are still going to be paid. And it's not only for salaries for the professionals that are already employed, this is also new professionals that are being developed, meaning in practicum, yes? So someone needs to support all of that. That's a lot of money. And if they're already really, really short on funds, cutting those funds, I don't see how that's going to improve the situation in any way.
All right, well, let's talk maybe about options for the unfortunate people who are really most impacted by this, aside from the doctors and the health professionals who are possibly on the chopping block, but also, of course, their patients. What organizations are maybe available that can supplement or help replace psychological care in the short term or in the immediate future for these people?
So many psychologists, I'm one of them, but many psychologists will offer discounts or payment plans. There are organizations, again, if you don't know what the organizations are, you are welcome to call and reach out to all of us. We will send you can say that, okay, look, I really don't have money. Please either, if whoever you just called isn't offering discounts or payment plans, we'll be very, very happy to guide you towards the organizations that are available in your area, because it's really per area, and they will differ. There aren't really any organizations that are, how should I say, countrywide. Yeah, it's more specific per area. But do reach out, because the organizations do exist. So don't be afraid, don't be ashamed, don't be embarrassed. Do reach out to, just literally call whoever you find on the net or on Facebook or anyone that's a psychologist or a social worker, and we will guide you to the right place.
Well, and of course, I don't expect you to speak for all practicing psychologists in the country, but of those that you know of, or as much to the best of your knowledge, these same psychologists who are working at the HMOs, are they also going to be available for some of this private one-on-one, making it work with the patients on an individual case basis? Is that something that they're involved in, or is that really you need to look for the psychologists who are in a position to offer that?
So most of us, most people have also private practices, even the ones that work with an HMO or some kind of a kupa, yeah. They will also supplement their living, basically. You can't really survive just on that. So they will also have private practices. Some will be willing to see the patients that they see through the kupa also in private, some won't. But it's okay, even if they are not, they can refer to someone else. The bottom line is reach out, because the assistance is there. For sure, reach out.
All right, Dr. Camila Forkash-Levan, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Now, forgetting the coronavirus for a bit, an Israeli soldier at a checkpoint in the northern West Bank narrowly avoided a terrible fate Saturday night when a Palestinian man targeted him with a Molotov cocktail. Thankfully for the soldier, though, despite the very close range of just a single meter or two, the suspect missed. Still, video of the incident shows a very troubling scenario in which the suspect was able to walk up, light the firebomb, throw it, and get away without a single shot of return fire. And in fact, the army is even still looking for the suspect, while experts look into ways of preventing such a situation in the future. Yamina Party MK Bezalel Smotrich, for one, is adding that it's not the soldier's fault, but rather that of the judicial system that seemingly incapacitates soldiers over fear of being indicted for their actions. Moving on, a massive security breach in the United Arab Emirates, now putting thousands of Israelis at risk for identity theft. This after the leak of personal information from Dubai-based tour company Sharaf Travels. The leak reportedly including full names, passport numbers, passport pictures, home addresses, and much, much more, all of which could be made available to hackers in a tidy PDF. But that's not all. Sharaf Travels is just one site known to be involved in the leak. So fearing a serious national security fiasco, Israeli cyber specialists are already in talks with their Emirati counterparts to identify other affected sites and fix the breach. All that said, this doesn't mean that you shouldn't head over to the Emirates for a quick trip in a new hotspot destination. It just means that Israelis should maybe stick to Israeli companies that they know and trust for issuing visas abroad. At least that is for now. Now, staying on the recent peace agreements with Israel, it's sometimes easy to forget that the road to normalization was paved with hardship and protest. And in many ways, it specifically comes on the heels of the so-called Arab Spring. But perhaps nothing illustrates this better than the last decade or so of political cartoons from the region. And here with the details is Noam Bannett, lecturer and analyst on the Arab world and the Middle East, specializing in political cartoons. Thank you so much for being with us, Noam. Now, what can we say about the last 10 years since the Arab Spring has begun? You know, has it been a success?
You know, it's a bit funny to say, but it's too early to call. But after we say that, I think when you look at the Middle East and we see what happened, we see Mubarak of Egypt, Gaddafi of Libya, Saleh of Yemen, and more, of course, and how the region changed, we have to say that there's a big change in the Middle East. But on the other hand, we have to see that many things are still in struggle. We see the economic situation in many countries, civil rights, and others that is still stuck.
Well, so yeah, I mean, again, maybe more specifically, did the Arab Spring really cause a shift in the Middle East over the last 10 years? And if so, you know, how would you characterize that shift?
I think the first thing, the three things that changed the last 10 years are Barack Obama, the Arab Spring, and Donald Trump. And the reason is that this combination brought the countries to understand the situation in other glasses. I think, first of all, when Obama came with his liberal way and how he looked at the Middle East, and then when he said to Mubarak, his good friend, the first place that Obama went was Cairo, and when he told Mubarak it's time to go, and other things like August 2013 with the chemical weapon in Syria, when they understood that Obama didn't really care for what happens in their perspective, of course, and later when Trump came, and think that's one of the things that led to what we see as the normalization.
So yeah, could you expand on that a little bit more? You know, how so you're saying Obama's maybe rejection or abandonment, so to speak, of the region led to them in turn saying, forget the US, let's go with Israel?
No, Obama showed the Middle East that he can't love everyone, of course, not literally. And when all the countries are looking what's going on, you know what? Let's see two points of the answer. The first thing is what the people in the Middle East shouted in the demonstrations. They wanted bread, life. They wanted freedom and social justice. And they didn't speak about one thing. They didn't speak about the Palestinian problem. And the other thing is stability. All over the Middle East, we see what happened in Syria. We see the civil war that we still have in Yemen and Libya, and of course, many other countries. And we see Israel. You know, many people don't like Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, and it's okay, of course. But when they see Israel with a prime minister that is elected in a democratic election and is still here for 11 years, it says something about the power of Israel. The other thing is two big enemies that are approaching in the Middle East. The one is the Sultan, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the Turkish prime minister. And on the other hand, of course, we see on the Shia side, the Islamic Republic of Iran. So when countries see what's going on with also Turkey and Iran, and they see how they're involved in so many places in the Middle East, they're thinking about how can they make themselves stronger. And after they saw what Obama did in his time as president, and they see how Trump is looking for his deal of the century that he spoke of so many, so they understood that the way to get to the weapons and power from the U.S. is through Israel.
All right, Noam Bennett, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
All right, speaking of expanding peace agreements, a new and beautiful song of unity is now making its way across the net. Hannah Rifkin with the story.
Among the growing number of Arab and Muslim states that have now normalized with Israel, Tunisia and Yemen are unfortunately not counted. But try and tell that to Israeli artist Ziv Yecheskel and Tunisian artist Nauman Shari, who just partnered up for an incredible duet, composed by a Yemenite artist who remains anonymous for the sake of his or her own safety. Then reaching for the widest audience possible, the song entitled Peace Between Neighbors is performed entirely in Arabic, but with Hebrew and English subtitles. And the video includes imagery both from Tunisia and Israel, though without expressly stating as much. Now, as for the message itself, the unnamed Yemenite writer says that the intention is to spread love and peace between peoples, with lyrics including lines like, "In my faith there is place for all religions," and my book calls on neighbors to overcome their differences and build bridges towards one another. Then finally, the project was organized by the New York-based Arab Council for Regional Integration, which describes itself as a pan-Arab initiative for fostering a spirit of partnership that knows no borders.
Now for our final story tonight, yet another Hanukkah holiday miracle, sorta. NBA rookie and 19-year-old Dani Avdija from northern Israel making his mark on the basketball league's preseason as he plays hard for the Washington Wizards. Announcers during last week's game against the Brooklyn Nets calling him the mensch off the bench as opposed to an elf on the shelf, while Avdija scored 2 of his 15 points that game. Then fast forward to the more recent preseason finale, Avdija again helping carry the team to its 99-96 point win against the Detroit Pistons, making 9 points, including 2 3-pointers, 10 rebounds, 2 assists, and 3 steals. And this leaving Avdija, of course, with a preseason slate average of 10.3 points per game, 6.3 rebounds, and a nearly 55% shooting average from the field. Proof of the skills that made him so sought after during the 2020 draft. And finally, returning the love, the Washington Wizards have launched a Hebrew Twitter page for Avdija's adoring fans at home. Now let's take a look at the weather forecast. Tonight and tomorrow should both be pleasant temperatures with clear skies countrywide. You can expect tonight a low of 49 degrees Fahrenheit or about 10 degrees Celsius. Then tomorrow the high should drop to 70 degrees Fahrenheit or 21 degrees Celsius. And now, of course, before we go, let's take a look at what's going viral in Israel. And of course, our ILTV producers again surprising us with a dog/penguin. I think it's a pupquin, is how you pronounce this? Pupquins. All right, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.24 shekels to the American dollar and 2.53 shekels to the Canadian dollar. For more news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube and Roku TV pages. I'm Aaron Porras. Thank you so much for watching.